Greetings, my fellow intellectuals and bookworms. I'm going to give you a second and third book review today. If you think I'm overcorrecting for the fact that I don't put out content every 3 or 4 weeks, well, I kind of understand. But the way I see it, even though I'm going to get you content more frequently, there's inevitably going to be times where demand for work as a college student will interfere with that. So consider this a down payment if you think I'm uploading too much. We're going to review this book today, The White Man's Burden, Why the West's Effort to Aid the Rest have done so much ill and so little good. Basically, it has the same problems as World of Slums. It blames the West for problems. It says that foreign aid suffers from political concerns, like the U.S. seeking to get strategic benefits out of it and so on. And to a certain extent, some of its criticisms are valid, that aid agencies, including USAID, Foreign, IMF, and the Internet, and other groups are too focused on accomplishing everything all at once, pursuing grand plans and not fulfilling them, setting goals, for example, the Millennium Development Goals or the Sustainable Development Goals, to accomplish something by the end of the century and then making little progress. Although, again, it does a decent job of undermining itself. It's willing to admit that programs in health and education have made improvement for all the reasons I stated in the previous video. But for those of you who are kind of fucking lazy and don't want to watch the previous video, I'll sum it up. Primary school enrollment has gone from 8% to 80% in Africa from 1950s and 60s to now, when the U.S. started getting involved. Secondary school enrollment went from 7% to 85%. In a lot of poor countries in Africa, there's now universal primary school enrollment, which is remarkable for the fact that people are living on $3 a day. U.S. health programs have reduced maternal mortality rate a couple times. Infectious diseases like smallpox has been completely eradicated, mostly due to the help of the U.S. Polio is on its way out. Guinea worm disease is almost entirely gone as well. Malaria has gone from 1.5 million fatal cases to 750,000 and falling. Even cholera and diarrheal illnesses are starting to be taken care of. So it is willing to admit that health and education things are working. And a lot of those are federal government programs through USAID or the International Monetary Fund or the UN aid groups. And only some of that is through private charitable organizations. So it kind of does a decent job at undermining its own thesis, if you will. It tries to argue that countries that were colonized by the British but not settled are worse off than in terms of growth 2 centuries after, which it's even willing to admit that part of the problems with countries like that is the fact that Western powers put borders in weird places, divided ethnic groups who should be together, give ethnic groups who absolutely hate each other, put them in the same country, and not give power or a nation state to some ethnic groups who want it while giving it to others. And he's even willing to admit that that may be the cause of it, but he doesn't really take it anywhere. He just assumes all problems are related to colonialism. It's like this guy in India wrote in a letter he sent to the UK newspaper The Guardian and India's Delhi Times. He's titled "A Letter from Colonized People to a Colonizer. What have the British ever done for me except build roads and build railways, install schools and hospitals, unify the country of India into one state, put a productive civil service in place, ban practices such as sati, which was a traditional practice that was harmful. It involved wives of husbands who died throwing themselves on the cremation pile to join them. And he ultimately says, and he strikes an important point there. Colonialism and imperialism is bad, and anyone who says it isn't is obviously wrong. But some countries treated their colonized people better. Some countries actually made efforts to improve lives among colonized peoples. Some actually built infrastructure and stuff. And part of the problem is the U.S. pressured countries like Britain and other colonial powers to give up their colonies in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they were more or less forced to. Now, it was a very good thing that the U.S. ended colonialism, but to a certain extent, countries like Britain planned on giving independence to a country like Nigeria in the 1980s, and their only plan was 20 years down the road. So by forcing the issue into the 1960s, you essentially got rid of the transition plan, meant that any proposal to fix problems, for example, to improve the road system, became an example of, well, if we're not going to stay here, why bother?
Oh, I was
Leave.
going to help you make your bed.
Not right now.
Okay. I'm going to watch TV. Do you want to come down?
I'll come down soon. So ultimately... No, he does not.
Okay.
So ultimately, though, if you want to grade imperial powers, the Spanish were the most brutal. The Belgians were second worst, especially in the Congo. The British and French were still brutal, but the British and French treated their colonial subjects slightly better and actually made efforts to improve quality of living. The U.S.'s short forays into colonialism, for example, the Philippines, improved conditions among the local population substantially and actually left a lasting beneficial impact. This book is also stupid enough to suggest that all foreign interventions that the U.S. has done with the goal of helping have been fucking harmful. The U.S. intervention in Vietnam, it did kill 2.5 million civilians, but only an idiot would assign all 2.5 million to the U.S. If you're a critic of the U.S., be honest with yourself. If China and the Soviet Union did not interfere in Vietnam, would there have been a war? The answer is definitely no. So split the death toll 50-50. It's even stupid enough to suggest that the U.S. intervention in the Korean War was not justified and just resulted in a couple million deaths for no gain. And when it puts it in the plus side, it says, a U.S. ally in the Pacific, yay, with sarcasm dripping. And here's the other thing. While it is true, there's a point that the U.S. has backed dictators in certain instances. We've only backed dictators when we haven't another choice, when the Cold War demanded it, or when you have to make an alliance with a dictator to stop worse conditions. And I mean, here's the thing. China and Russia's military aid and aid to other countries not only comes with conditions, but it is used to murder foreign citizens abroad. It's, at least with U.S. guns, if we know it's being used horribly, we either consider or actually cut off the taps of military aid. With China, there's no conditions and they keep doing it. In addition, China's Belt and Road loans have 25% or greater interest rates, and the collateral is a country's natural resources, which of course creates hatred. And it also tries to argue that certain countries are just beyond fixing. That, for example, the country of Haiti is just unfixable. It's broken and will never get better. And the point that it's had a 200-year history and only 2 presidents have successfully carried out their terms without either being shot dead, exiled, or couped. Well, it is true. Arguing that not helping is an option is wrong. At least critics of the U.S. never give the U.S. credit for trying to improve matters. It also says that the U.S. is responsible for the genocide in Rwanda, for the failed operation in Somalia, and so on. The U.S. at least tried to make conditions better here. The U.S., did not intervene in Rwanda because we were concerned about what the international community would think. But we did intervene in the Bosnian wars, and we protected more than 1 million people from getting genocided, and we received no credit for that. The problem with the Somalia operation is we occupied the country. We didn't send enough military force. We sent aid convoys, but we didn't bother sending a military force to protect it. So ultimately, we had an opportunity to confiscate weapons from all of the warlords, the condition for the aid. Because of weak foreign policy, we didn't do it. In general, hawkish foreign policy is ultimately the only way. If you want to send temporary aid to help civilians, you have to back it up with military force to ensure the aid convoy isn't attacked. And you can always, if you use too much force, you can always change your tactic and use less later. You can always apologize to a country. But if you use too little, you generally don't have a second chance to fix it. It's an example of you use none, an aid convoy gets hijacked in a third world country, and the money from selling it goes to arms dealers. They're unarmed aid workers. What do you expect them to do? You provide only 2 soldiers or a token force to protect it. Now, not only does the aid convoy possibly still get stolen, but now soldiers could either be kidnapped or killed because in certain parts of the world they really don't like the U.S. All of those are bad scenarios. And essentially the U.S. sees itself, and it's not even neocolonialism or white man's burden or even imperialism. The way we see it, the U.S. is the most powerful, influential, and important nation in the world. We have a responsibility to other countries, so we're going to at least try and help. Because after all, we're a beacon of freedom, one of the first democracies in modern times. And ultimately, I feel like this book fails to understand literally anything. And it chooses the easy route of saying that resource extraction and somewhat exploiting the fact that other countries have cheap resources and cheap labor is colonialism or neocolonialism. If I buy, say, books from you at a fair market price, or at what we both agree is a fair price, am I exploiting you? No. If you're desperate to get rid of these books, or they don't have much value to you, so you're willing to knock down the price, let's say 25% or more below market value, am I exploiting you? The answer is no. And ultimately, when you buy cheap labor in foreign countries, you improve their standard of living. And eventually, the jobs will provide an increase in wages and also give people skills. In countries like Bangladesh, when the sweatshops are shut down, you see children end up in child prostitution rings. So ultimately, sometimes while it is true that attempts to help sometimes end horribly wrong, it doesn't really propose a solution besides give up. So again, it really fails, but to answer any questions, in terms of actually being a good book, the analysis is good. It has plenty of graphs and data, which I like, but it has no solutions. So it's not bad enough for me to consider donating to charity or selling for a knockdown price. But it's also not really a book that I actually want to take up space on my bookshelves. But it's slightly good enough to keep. So 3 out of 5 stars. I do not recommend you buy it. But if you have an opportunity to borrow it from a friend or say get it for $1 at a library book sale, you should do so. Sean Hartnett, signing out.